There is amounts of study that are now giving us direct correlation between dementia, which if you think of all dementia cases, 70 to 80% of them are women, is a direct correlation because of the loss of estrogen. And over time is where you start to see an increase in inflammation and the plaques that form in the neurons and how the brain is able to make those exchanges over time, causing dementia. So now you have three things with later on in life that are clearly related to estrogen decline. So again, estrogen rules.
So 1 billion with a B, women will have experienced menopause by 2025, and most will be in their 40s. What is the one thing, if you could wave your magic wand and let all these women know one thing, what would that be?
If I could wave my magic wand, is that all of us will go through menopause, but we don't have to do it in a way that is less understood and lonely, and that we have the modalities for us to make this transition as beautiful as it can be.
Why do you think this transition in many ways is misunderstood?
Mm. I'm so glad you started that there because I think that there's so much that presents this implication of misunderstanding is because of societal norms of what is a woman's worth after she's past a certain age? What are we willing to do when she starts to have symptoms or conditions that decrease her quality of life? And I think that's a good place for us to start because that's really the fundamental issue of why we don't have the capabilities and modalities and tools that we have for women as they go through this transition. Because if you think that all women are going to go through menopause, not 92%, not 93, 100%, and we don't place importance on the value of women and who they are in improving their quality of life, then that's where we do have the issue. And so the more that we suppress women in the understanding of what they can accomplish and how they can feel better, then that's going to be the message that they're going to take for themselves and follow along with that. So the narrative itself needs to change tremendously. And that is where we are going as we start to talk more about empowering women to feel better through these transitions of perimenopause and menopause, but also truly understanding that they don't have to suffer. And that's what a lot of women come into my office explaining is that these things are happening. One, I don't know who to talk to about it. Two, I feel a little bit embarrassed about bringing up these topics. And three, I don't even know what to do.
So if a woman walks into your office, the very example you used, what do you tell this woman? How can she not suffer? What is that message of hope?
The one thing that I've seen, in my practice has changed tremendously over the last 5 to 7 years because I used to be in a very high volume practice. And therefore, I didn't have the time to expand the story of what that individual is going through, is now that's where I start. Who are you? What's your story? And what is impacting your life? And from there, that's when I'm really able to take charge because every woman who walks through that door is going to have a different story. They're going to have a different experience of menopause. And so I want them to understand that what I'm giving to them in the form of education or the form of management is attuned to their story. And so that's generally where I start. And from there, then I'm able to identify because of what you've brought to me, here's how I'm able to help you. And then that's where they see the value because it's not just, oh, you're going through menopause, here's what you should do. It's you're going through perimenopause into a menopause transition, or you're already menopausal. What are you suffering from? What are the things that are hindering you from being your best self? Then I can kind of narrow it down that way.
Well, is it safe to say that one of the treatments, which seems to be getting a ton of attention and deservedly so these days, that gives women hope is HRT? And in your book, you have a chapter titled The ABCs of HRT.
I wanted to make it as simple as possible. Like, here's where we're going to start. It's like a primer, right? An elementary school primer. The ABCs, because many times people have heard misinformation about HRT, and rightly so when we think of the WHI done 20 years ago, that there was a very kind of averse scare tactic run when you can from hormones. And so if that's all that lives in your head from, again, media, storytelling, friend sharing, then that's what you're going to believe. So the whole belief system of what HRT is has to change. And that has to be sometimes a lot of individual interactions with someone who does understand how the WHI was flawed and how hormones can be the key to your longevity and also helping with your symptoms as you go through menopause.
So let's spend a moment on that study. So it was a WHI study. It started in the 90s, ran through 2000, and this study created a lot of anxiety. Can you talk about why this study was so troubling for many?
Yeah. So even with context, I think people don't understand why the WHI study was done, but this was actually for a primary prevention type of study to see how hormones impacted possibility of heart disease and stroke, cardiovascular disease. And when they did the study, what they were able to see, a study is always going to look at other things as well, but the primary thing of what they were looking for was what I had mentioned. What they were able to see through the study is that there was a small, when I say small, a small increase in incidence of breast cancer. But there were a lot of other benefits that weren't featured. That's where we would say that the media sound bites or what was taken from the study was magnified because they did halt the study. And they halted a study for a good reason, is because they had to understand, well, if we're having these types of outcomes, no matter how large or small it was, then it is our responsibility in a research study to make sure we're not doing something that is going to cause harm. And so when they stopped the study, that's what they were able to look at is, okay, what were we able to find? And that's what research is really good at, is saying, okay, now let's look at what we did and what were the good things, what were the bad things, good, bad, and ugly. The media at that point had already run with the narrative, hormones cause breast cancer. And so from that, it was just this whirlwind for both providers and for patients to being like, holy crap, we got to shut it down and it's bad. And that's really, when you think of media today, how messages get out. And it can be the shortest little excerpt from what is the truth. And that's what people run with. So at that point, there was kind of no, moving away from that message. And if you actually look at studies from the time that that study was halted, which was around 2002, HRT declined as far as being prescribed 84%. 84%. So it's literally, it was shut down. It's like a factory shut down in one day. Like there's doors are chained, no employees are getting into this factory. What they were able to find, and this is the fascinating part of research and why we do science and why we have studies, is when they looked at the study, they realized that the population of women that they included in this study was where most of the flaw was. And when I say flaw, I mean that they had extracted a group of women who were already older, who had already had the aging component of what happens in aging, meaning inflammation, increase in plaques in their arteries, stiffening of the arteries, increased risk of cancer, because age is one of the risk factors of cancer. And that's where they realized that that's why some of the outcomes of what they had in the study, because they didn't study the correct group of women who should have been exposed to hormones, which is a much younger demographic, meaning your mid 40s through your mid 50s. And that's where we saw that, one, estrogen does not cause breast cancer. I will say that emphatically. But it was actually the synthetic progestin that they used in the study that was the increase in breast cancer. But that's not the media soundbite that went out. So when you take all of that in and you say, okay, the study was done, it was kind of maybe not the best group of women that they should have started the hormone replacement therapy on. We saw that estrogen does not cause breast cancer looking back at it, but it was a synthetic progesterone. But what we didn't get out for the media soundbite was the benefit of what hormone replacement therapy was actually able to give, which is there was a decrease in colon cancer. You had a decrease in diabetes. You had a improvement in bone health, osteoporosis. And so those are the things when you actually look at what would we be able to provide women from a longevity standpoint if we started hormone replacement therapy earlier and then followed that to see what the outcomes were later on in life. And that's where we are now, but that story is gonna take a while to get out, but I think that, I'm always optimistic that we will get to that point where hormone replacement therapy will be understood as something that not only decreases symptoms, but creates longevity.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not just about alleviating symptoms of night sweats and not sleeping and all the, the hot flashes, all the all the symptoms no one wants to experience. It's about longevity.
Yeah. Longevity to me is everything because the one thing that I will say, we are all going to age. As much as we don't want to or may want to, whoever, we are all going to age, but we actually have the ability to decide how we would like to age. And that's what longevity is. It's well span. When I'm 80, am I going to do it well? And am I going to be vivacious? And am I going to have the ability to do daily activities without being handicapped or not being able to do it? That's what we have the ability to decide how we would like to do that journey.
I agree. And I think you're hitting on mindset. And I think the mindset is, I think, in my view, very new in that maybe a decade ago, for the most part, people would say, well, I'm getting older. Maybe I'm going to take it easy. Or that's just, "Oh, okay, like the joints, they kind of just accepted aging as part of the process, the circle of life. And I think today, people leading the conversation, yes, some, probably doing so uh, in an extreme way, have rejected that notion of, I'm going to feel worse or I can't do those things. And are maybe it's working out, maybe it's dialing in nutrition, maybe it's pharmaceutical intervention, which I think also many people in our world like a decade ago were very resistant to. It was just, natural versus pharma. And now I think those worlds are colliding in a way that
Which they should.
exactly, which is healthy. It's, what works with minimal side effects. And I do think that's part of it. But like coming back to the longevity piece, how, why wouldn't someone consider HRT?
I think because of scare tactics. I think, we as humans want to be storytelling. How we hear information, how we take in information, a lot has to do with your circle around you, right? Or what you hear on media or Instagram. So there's no true no one's sitting there reading scientific studies all day and being like, this is how I'm gonna, chart the course of my life. It's really taking in stories and what's happened to someone. And I heard this person had that. And many times it's a lot of misinformation, right? And so the misinformation can really cloud the judgment of why someone would or wouldn't. And fear is a really big factor in why someone would be willing to do something or not, whether it's truth or not. Fear alone can drive someone to completely push away anything that would be beneficial for them.
Well said. So let's assume you're in an elevator, you're on your book tour for your book, and someone says, "What's HRT?" Let's go back to the ABCs. What's the who, what, when, where, how?
Yeah. So I always start back with, we already have hormones in our body. They are chemical messengers. They're a vibrant part of how our organ systems function. HRT, through the process of decline, which happens biologically, you can't evade it. It is going to happen for every woman throughout the perimenopause and menopausal phase. And as we start to have that decline, those chemical messengers are not able to tell the rest of our body how to function at its best. And so HRT gives you that ability to give you back those chemical messengers so that the functioning of the rest of your body has the ability to be the best that it can be as you start to age.
So, and so there's this transition. I think every woman knows this. The average age of perimenopause is 47, and I believe lasts for 4 years. When do I start thinking about this? When do I start having a conversation with my medical provider who may or may not be so keen about HRT?
The conversation is key. I think, even, I'm going to be very honest. When I was training, so that would be in the early mid 2000s, was kind of right after the WHI. really averse to giving hormones as a form of therapy to our patients. The other thing that we did, which again, I'm so glad that we've moved out of that phase, is we would wait till women were proven menopausal, which, technically all menopause means is you've gone 12 months consecutively without a period. Like you can't have a spotting here and then 3 months later have a spotting, 12 months, no period. Once you hit that 12 months, you can say, I'm in menopause. We would not treat women with hormones until they reach that point. And just like you said, the perimenopausal phase can start at 47, can last 4 years. So during that time frame, you're having symptoms, you're not feeling your best, you're like, "Something is off." And a lot of times providers will say, "I have to wait till you're menopausal." And so the problem with that, it's we're waiting till the tank is empty before providing them with the sustainability of these hormones. And so the conversation that we should be having with HRT can start as early as 40, right? Because there are a lot of women who start to feel some of these subtle changes. Or I've had women who, for example, maybe had breast cancer. And so they go right into menopause, or they had a hysterectomy and their ovaries were taken and they go right into menopause. I have met women who were in their early 30s, latter 20s, who had hysterectomies for whatever reason, ovaries taken, and they've gone all this time until I see them in their latter 30s, 40s without hormone replacement therapy, and I want to cry. So, with that being said, you have that population who surgically had hormones removed, but then you do have some people biologically who start early in their 40s having these symptoms. So this conversation really should start for women in their 30s, not meaning that they have to start HRT, but being body aware and knowing when I get to that point where something starts to happen and it's not all meshing together and gelling right, that's when I can go to my doctor and say, "Hey, these things are starting to happen. Would you recommend that I start on HRT at this time?"
For those who are doing not even extensive lab work, but regular blood work, they're probably getting a hormone panel. Do you have any advice for someone trying to interpret their hormone panel to look out for and like, hey, this may be coming, and so that they can have an informed conversation with their medical provider?
Yeah, this is also one of those controversial topics that are occurring now because we've kind of moved the scale back into giving perimenopausal women the option of starting HRT is the lab work.
I love it. Let's go with it. Let's go. Let's stir the pot.
Let's stir the pot with this one because I hope for people that are listening that they truly understand in a perimenopausal phase, we explained that still having a cycle. And so when we look at labs, actually, for someone who's having a cycle, that means that their body is still producing at some point estrogen and progesterone in a cyclic fashion because they're having a cycle. And so sometimes with lab work, it is very hard to ascertain where your hormones are. Are you in the luteal phase of your cycle, the follicular phase? I just know you're still having a cycle. So the lab work is not going to help me say, yes, because you're this number on your lab work, then yes, you can get HRT. What I would say is most important for me, I don't ever decline taking lab work for my patients who are perimenopausal and we're considering HRT because it's great to get a baseline. Let's see where you are at this point. What's more important to me is what are the symptoms that you're having? Because I know that you are now having symptoms of some decline of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone that is now revealing its way in a symptom. And to me, that is what I'm treating. Is the patient who's having a symptom, I'm not treating your lab work. And so for people who I've heard a lot of women who say, yes, my doctor wants to give me HRT or continue me on some type of, birth control as a form of hormones, but I have to get my lab work done every 3 or 6 months. To me, that doesn't necessarily create the best way of management because it doesn't matter what their labs are saying. I already know they're still having their cycle. What are your symptoms? That's what I'm treating.
So for people who see you, what are the symptoms that show up the most?
Definitely, I would say, hot flashes, they're not usually very frequent, but they start to become impacting their daily life. I would say sleep disturbances are another one, and then mood, kind of like this just anxiety, mental fog, like they just their memory is off, executive functioning is a little bit different for them. And that I would say are probably the hallmark symptoms that I see in the perimenopausal phase. And it's just this feeling of that all these things are starting to happen. Nothing's aligning the way it used to, and I need help.
And so let's say that's happening, and a woman listening goes to her medical provider and asks for HRT. The medical provider says no, other than leave the medical provider and go see you if they can, or someone else.
That's a lot of what's said.
But unfortunately, that's a lot of how does one is it even worth how does one make the case to their doctor? Or in your view, is it just impossible once you have a doctor who's just, not open to this treatment?
I would say at that point, that's when you've kind of reached this junction of I'm not going to necessarily get the pathway that I feel would be best for me at this point. And that's when I do, empower women to say, you're the CEO of your health. And if the partner in this business of your health is not necessarily tuned in all the way, then you might need to find another partner. And that may mean finding another healthcare provider, which for some is so hard because it's such like an intimate relationship you have usually with your doctor that you feel a lot of people feel like they're breaking up. But at the end of the day, we've said this earlier, even in our conversation, is your health and your well span and longevity are much more important. So it might need to be a breakup. There might be a breakup in there somewhere.
So when are you gonna open an office in Miami? My wife, Colleen, and I will have like 100 women lined up for you immediately.
Discussed this, at the beginning, and I said, "I'm there. I am there." And I'm like, I definitely would love to expand what I do. And I do telehealth, through my practice in Dallas, but I think that we're onto something. Let's do it.
Look, it's a big problem, and I love Miami. I don't want to like poo poo on Miami, but I think a lot of doctors around the country, are maybe stuck in their ways and still refer to that study. And I think, look, I love doctors. I have many of our good friends are doctors, but I think there's a quality in some doctors where they develop very strong views that aren't exactly loosely held, so to speak.
If you think, if someone were to, and that's a very true statement, if you think of how we were trained, right? We are going through rigorous training for 10, 14, however many years. And it is so focused on exactly what we need to do. We are great at preventing catastrophe. When shit hits the fan, we are like, we've got you. When things are going well and we're trying to maybe optimize it or create better pathways so someone can do better, that's maybe not where we always shine, right? Because we are focused on disease. If someone has disease, we know how to get you back and course correct. When someone is doing well, but it's may look okay on labs and someone's like, maybe I'm not feeling that great, but you look good, your labs are okay. We don't necessarily shine there because our training is specifically designed to make sure that people don't die. And when they have disease, that we're able to manage it and keep them living. What we need to spend more of our time on is before someone gets to that space of a catastrophe or a disease state, how do we help optimize to improve well span? Because, like I said before, we're all going to age. But if I wait till you're ridden with 5 different diseases, yes, you will still age and maybe it is managed, but what is your quality of life in that?
Right. So let's say someone can't see you in Dallas or in your new office in Miami, and they're having a conversation with their doctor, and their doctor's open to it. Says, "All right, I'm open to it. I'm trying to get educated." And this is where we want to empower our listeners. So you say in your practice, use all forms of HRT. This is, we're going to go a level deeper: pharmaceutical, bioidentical, and compounded bioidentical hormones. I think those are can you spend some time educating our audience so they can be empowered to have a conversation?
I would love to. And this is a lot of where we see confusion, not only in for consumers and patients and clients, but also the healthcare providers. When we think of just how drugs were made from back in the 20s or the early 1900s, it was done through compounding. That's when your pharmacist would take whatever medication and put it together, and that's how we started compounding, and that's how we got our medications. And in the 40s is really where we started to see more of the expansion of pharmaceuticals, right? So making the drug that's going to help your blood pressure decrease, or, insulin to help with diabetes. But we still do today have both forms of providing medications, whether that's through compounding or through pharmaceuticals. When we look at HRT specifically, we again have those both ways of doing that. So I always like to put them in those two categories first so people have a true understanding of what's presented to them, so they understand that's usually where we're starting. Something that's compounded, being made from a pharmacist, and those that are made synthetically from a pharmaceutical company. Now, the difference is when we think of hormones, they can be bioidentical, but you can have bioidentical pharmaceutical made medications and bioidentical compounded HRT. So that's usually where I hear a little bit of the difference, is because people believe if it's bioidentical, it can only be compounded. But pharmaceuticals do make bioidenticals. Now, taking it even a step further is pharmaceutical HRT is FDA approved, meaning it's gone through the oversight of what is considered FDA approved. And compounding is a little bit different because it does have regulation in how it's manufactured. It's just not like made on the corner in someone's apartment. It goes through a very rigorous regulations through 503B pharmacies and regulations, but it's just not FDA approved. That again is another kind of misnomer or misconception of safety of the differences. And so for me as a provider, I offer all of those options to women so that they truly understand that they have the ability to decide how they would like to receive their HRT through those different forms. Because to me, at the end of the day, the more options that you have, the more we're able to find what is going to work best for you. Because you have some people who will be, I don't want to take, pharmaceuticals. I'd rather take compounded. Some do a little bit of both. Some are only compounded. Some are I only want to do something that comes from a pharmaceutical company. Great. Because at the end of the day, I want you to feel your best, but knowing that you've had a firm foundation and understanding all of this before you make the decision. And I'm not going to pit one against the other. I'm going to give you all of the different options so you have the best way of understanding what works best for you. Because you should be able to try anything you want with safety and guidance, but I'm not going to take away your ability to make that decision because I think one is bad and one is good.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show and you won't regret it. So if someone were to say, Doc, I have no preference, I just want this to work, is it safe to say you don't have a preference or you do? Or is it more of a person looking like, for example, is pharmaceutical better for someone who's maybe on the older end and experiencing X symptom versus bioidentical is maybe a different use case? Like, how do you think about the different use cases?
Yeah. So the different use cases, again, going back to when I said, when they come into my office, what is your story and what are you showing up with? And so, for example, I know that I look at now the different hormones and what they're actually going to contribute towards in symptom resolution is if it's hot flashes and night sweats, I know categorically that estrogen is going to be that hormone that's really going to pave the way for decrease in hot flashes and night sweats. So from that, then I'll say you can take oral estrogen, you can take patch, gel, cream, you can also take pellets. I'm saying these are the different ways that you can have exposure to estrogen that can decrease your hot flashes and night sweats. And then they get to decide, well, tell me more about this option versus this option. Or, yeah, I don't feel comfortable with that option. I'm going to choose this option. And I'll be like, great, this is what we're actually going to provide for you because now you understand what the utility is and what are the modalities and how you can take this hormone. What do you feel is best for you? Now, there are some patients who my job and responsibility is if they don't know which one that they would want to choose, then I can say, based on your lifestyle or based on maybe your past medical history, I think this one would be a better choice for you. Are you okay with this choice for you?
I'm curious, personally, what's your preference?
So I love giving my personal opinion on what I take because I am on HRT. So I take estrogen and testosterone in the form of pellets, bioidentical pellets. And my progesterone is actually through my IUD, which I've had for years, but it has progesterone in it. And so for me, I wanted something that was bioidentical, which I could have gotten in a pharmaceutical form, of a bioidentical. But what I also appreciated with how I take my hormones is that it has low maintenance. I mean, we just talked about my book tour and how I'm going to 7 cities in 1 month, which is, even outside of a book tour, I travel a lot and I speak. And so for me, I want something that's low maintenance. I'm like, I know that I'm getting what I need and not having to take something every day or twice a week or whatever it is. And the other reason is because I get to with bioidenticals and compounding and pellets, you get to really do dosage really well because you can go up by 5, down by 10, you can go up by 20. It's a little bit harder to do that sometimes with some of the forms that we see in the other modalities of creams and pills and et cetera. So for me, that was my best form that I found that would work with my lifestyle and ability to, titrate what would be best for me based on symptoms.
And in terms of lifestyle modification, what do you recommend to support people through their transition, especially if they're doing HRT? Is it lifting more, more protein? I'm curious, like where are you on lifestyle?
I love this question because guess what? This is the hardest part of aging and going through perimenopause and menopause or any life, kind of condition is lifestyle changes. And I'm sure you've seen this too, is the ability for someone to say, okay, now I'm going to increase my protein intake requires time. And so it's being the consistency with those small changes over time that's going to get you that big outcome. But that's also the hardest part of it because it's habit changing. And a lot of people don't realize how much work goes into changing an actual habit. We are creatures of habit. Our brain wants to do that same thing the same way every day. And now you're trying to change it to do something else. You're going to get a little resistance and pushback by your inner self, and then the other thing is with exercise, with lifting, because I know that your muscle mass through this time frame, you're going to be losing a certain percentage every year. And our vitality, I would say, when we look at vitality in general and longevity, our muscles are really going to be that most sustainable organ that's going to give us the best outcome of that. And so that is going to require building your muscles through this phase when you're starting to decline, and that's also hard because that means that people are gonna have to put in time and effort into weightlifting. And so if they've never done it before, they're like, "Say what? I have to start doing this now? When am I gonna do it? I don't have time in my day," right? That's usually when someone has to do something, whether it's with nutrition, with weightlifting, they're like, "I don't have the time." And I'm like, everyone has the time. It's how you choose to prioritize it, which is going to, again, change the habit. Change the habit of your day and how you put it into your day is the hardest part of anything.
How do you do it? You're busy, you're a mom, you've got 2 little boys, right?
Yeah. And I have found that the best way to do it is to always think in my head, what do I want for myself and how do I want to show up later on in life requires my investment now. And so I've always been an advocate. I say this as kind of like a little tidbit on on me and my past life is I actually got my undergrad degree in exercise physiology and human sciences. So I've always been very aware of what the body can do when you give it the tools and the fuel to do that thing. And so working out for me has always been a very big part of my life. But what I will say is I even had to change the way that I worked out and saw the change in habit in because I used to be mostly running, a little bit of weightlifting. I always would weightlift, but not heavy like I do now. And now I've somewhat changed the running pattern and as far as how much and frequent I used to run into, okay, I will run, but it won't be that much because I need to focus more of my workout into weightlifting and resistance training.
And what's had the biggest impact for you personally recently? Of all the things, you've got access to all the whether it's the modifications or anything.
I would say the weightlifting. I've noticed significant ability for me to sustain my body when it wants to not do the things that I want it to do because of going through perimenopause is I would say you had asked before, and actually I forgot to put this one in there. Probably another big complaint for women is how their body fat shifts, right? So when we were in our 20s and it was nice and on our butt and on our hips, and now our fat is like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and go a little bit north to that mid belly region, and, that's again something that comes with aging and decrease in estrogen. And if we, again, don't start to change our habits earlier on in life with weightlifting and shifting that ratio between muscle mass and fat, that's when you're gonna start to see the outcomes. And I think that has definitely been one of my saving graces as I start to age and go into my 50s and my latter 40s now, of what's been able to sustain and push back and thwart a little bit of that migration of fat cells.
Men have the same problem, but in different areas. Different hormone, different areas.
And testosterone. I think women think that testosterone is not for them and it's only for men.
Yeah. And so how many days a week do you lift? What does your workout schedule look like?
Yeah, my workout schedule, I'm a very much early morning workout person because I know once the day starts, the likelihood of me getting a workout in is much less. So before I start my day, I do a lot of heavy lifting. I make sure that I incorporate whether it's a when we call sit, so sprint interval training or HIT, which is, high intensity training, that I incorporate some type of movement in between my lifting to ensure that we're getting nice short bursts of intensity, and I lift heavy. I've really increased the ability that I can lift by obviously adaptability over time, your muscle adapts to that. And I would say another thing that I do, even though I know a significant amount about weight training and I'm very comfortable with my routine, I still use a personal trainer from time to time to make sure that I'm not caught in a routine that is just your body's like, we've done this before, we know what we're doing, is changing up your routine as well. Because again, that's again, habit. Your body's like, we've done this. I know what you're doing. So you got to change it up a bit. And so I bring in a personal trainer probably twice a month to say, hey, let's make sure I'm increasing the amount of weight that I can do. What are some other routines that I need to incorporate that I may have missed from before? And that's how I like to kind of make sure that I'm staying on a course of not being just lackadaisical in my workout and challenging myself.
And how many days a week do you lift and for how long?
I would say that my ideal week would be 4, and sometimes it's maybe only 3 times a week, but 4 days a week is where I feel like this is what I can fit into my schedule. I make sure when I travel, I will always, always travel with workout clothes and always find a gym in a hotel, always.
And for how long do you try to stay in the gym?
I am a very short workout person because of my time, so I would say if I can get a workout in between 35 to 40 minutes, I'm golden.
I'm the same way. I don't rest between sets. Part of it's
Yeah.
time management, but I also just don't like sitting around.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned lifting heavy. How do you think about, like, how many reps are you looking to get in if you're lifting heavy?
So if I'm at a good weight and I know I'm trying to sustain that for a little bit to just, kind of keep that routine in, I will do 3 to 4 sets of 10 to 12. When I increase, I know I'm gonna go down. So I'll probably go for 3 sets from 8 to 10, because I'm now lifting something so much heavier that I am trying to make sure that my form is correct, because form is everything, and I'm really trying to decrease risk of injury. I don't have time for an injury, as you, I'm sure you're like, I don't either. So with safety, then I will decrease that amount, 3 sets to 8 or 10.
And something else, which is another, I think, big change recently, in women trying to build lean muscle mass as they approach mid-age and just women in general. I think it's a wonderful shift, this idea that, I think we did women such a disservice, a decade or so ago when it was about, cleansing and detoxing and dieting. And it was this, a scarcity mentality, if you will. It was about eating less and withering away and running on the treadmill. And now it's about, no, you need to eat more protein and you need to lift. And no, you're not eating enough. No, you don't need to lose weight. We need to do a body recomp. And that's just so empowering because who the hell wants to starve themselves and not eat anything?
I don't know, but I remember, back in my 30s, like the whole diet culture. At some point, every woman has tried a diet. And it is just not I tried to do a carb-free diet for a week, and I am sure there are some people who are like, "You are the most horrible person right now." And I was like, "You are right, but I'm not having any carbs." And the other thing that I would say is exactly what you just said is changing the mentality of women understanding why it's important to eat more, but what are you fueling when you're eating yourself and changing that. But estrogen receptors are all over the body. I know I said it earlier, but in addition to when we think of skeletal muscle, estrogen receptors are in with our actual muscle. So there is going to be a direct role between estrogen and skeletal muscle. And as we start to decrease our muscle mass and not having estrogen as well, there has to be some way that we are going to increase our muscle mass. Even, I mean, if you're taking estrogen, that's going to be helpful. But if you're not, we still have to substantiate that skeletal muscle mass, the function, but also muscle strength, because that's what's going to solidify our bones, which also take a hit during the menopause phase because of estrogen. And if you were to take the three main things that I would say as women start to age that really limit their longevity and quality of life, would be muscle mass, and so that's going to be with decrease in bone, so fall and break a hip. The mortality rate after falling and breaking a hip is in the 60 70th percentile. So quality of life decreases, but you also have a really increased risk of just dying after that type of injury. And then what's the number one killer of women worldwide? Heart disease. And heart disease is usually what we see again with women in the menopausal phase because why? Estrogen decrease, and there's estrogen receptors on the heart muscle, with again protecting the heart muscle. And then the other thing is our brain. Our brain has estrogen receptors as well. And now we are seeing studies. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, she actually contributed to the book Generation M, but also has a book called The Menopause Brain. And there is amounts of study that are now giving us direct correlation between dementia, which if you think of all dementia cases, 70 to 80% of them are women, is a direct correlation because of the loss of estrogen. And over time is where you start to see an increase in inflammation and the plaques that form in the neurons and how the brain is able to make those exchanges over time, causing dementia. So now you have three things with later on in life that are clearly related to estrogen decline. So again, estrogen rules.
Well, also you speak of muscle and brain and something else we've seen a dramatic shift with even our own product, creatine. Women are taking creatine. This is new. It's incredible.
Very new. I'm sure that, I mean, when you bring up creatine and you're talking with your followers, do you find that there is this like light bulb, like, oh, I didn't know I could take it or should take it?
What's been so interesting is the majority we have a creatine with taurine product, and it's doing extremely well, and the majority of customers are women. And it
Mhm.
is so exciting because you talk about bad science. I think there was a lot of bad science on creatine, and then everyone kind of flipped on it. And the benefits in terms of muscle and brain health, which are two big issues for women as they age. And like the result, what's amazing is that if you start taking creatine, you kind of see the results pretty quickly if you're lifting.
Yeah. I take creatine too. I put it into my shakes. And I would definitely say that I feel when I'm increasing my weight, say, with my routine, is that I don't feel necessarily like this strenuous ability to reach that new weight. And so I think a lot of that has to do with my change in my input and intake with increased protein and creatine as well. And so I think that anything that we can take from a supplement perspective that's going to have a direct effect on how our body is able to utilize energy or make energy more available during exercise is also very important as well. And that again is a lifestyle shift of what are the things that I can add to my daily requirements or diet that's going to again help with the workout that then is going to help with how I show up later on in life and longevity.
Well, we'll have to send you ours. We'll table that for after this conversation.
Would love it.
So, if you could do any study, have it funded, have unlimited resources, what would you do?
I would say definitely looking at HRT and the benefits. I really do believe that testosterone. I think that there are a lot of studies. Let me go back a little bit. There are a lot of studies right now that are focused on estrogen, where I do see kind of a paucity of research right now is with testosterone in women and longevity. And I think that there needs to be some emphasis on that, because we do know that there are a lot of studies, most of them, though, are dedicated to men and testosterone and the benefits of that, is that we need to focus a lot of those studies on women. And the reason it has to be specifically for women is obviously we require lower amounts of testosterone, but for a long time, they used to do cardiac studies on men and then take the results and recommendations and use them for women, which still weren't very helpful
No, not
because
at all.
unbeknownst to a lot of people, we are not little men, but also it's still the number one cause of women dying. So somewhere in there, the research wasn't dedicated to women and how they show up in heart disease. And now we're kind of behind the 8 ball because we're having to redo a lot of studies in just women to see what those outcomes are. I think the same goes for testosterone because I think in estrogen, we're kind of like on the wheelhouse of getting better studies with estrogen and longevity and benefits. But testosterone, I think, is still has not been touched well, and we need to kind of speed up on that.
Agreed. And we covered so much ground today. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to touch on or leave our audience with some words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would definitely say that one, we're gonna have to do a whole 'nother, podcast because there's so much more you and I could talk about. But what I wanna leave today, specifically for what we've covered is that women are 100% gonna go through menopause, and half of the world's population are women. And so globally, for whatever woman is listening to this, or even men that can, share this with the loved women in their lives, is that although we're all going to go through menopause, we have the ability to decide how we would like to transition into this beautiful new chapter of life. And if there's anything that I could do to change the narrative of what we think of menopause now, is that it's this beautiful chapter that we can accept with grace because we do have tools to get us there. And so to be accepting of those tools to help yourself, there are resources, there are ways that we can be in our best self through this transition. And that was why I wrote Generation M, was that to empower women to create community so that they can make this more of, I always say, as a screenplay, that menopause right now is a horror story. Everyone's like, running around from all these zombies. And I wanna make it more of a comedic love story where people can come back to themselves, create more mind-body connection, and use, if they choose to, hormones as a way to solidify their transition and create longevity.
Well, in addition to picking up your fabulous book, Generation M, which I encourage everyone to do so, where can people find you online?
Yes, they can find me online at Jessica Shepherd MD. So that's SHEPHERD MD.com. And then on Instagram, I really encourage people to find me because I love giving new insight every day on this transition at Jessica Shepherd MD. And also at Modern Meno, MENO. Modern Meno is really just dedicated to this perimenopause and menopause transition. And that's where I love to show up for my followers as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.